Welcome to the Boardroom Brain podcast, everyone. I'm Dr. Lauren Cook. I am thrilled about the guest that we have joining us today. You are going to enjoy this one so much. Let me introduce to you Shaunak Roy. He is the founder and CEO of Yellowdig. Yellowdig is a community-driven active learning platform adopted by over 130 colleges and universities, K-12 schools, and corporate training clients. Yellowdig's mission is to transform every classroom into an active, social, and experiential learning community. Shaunak graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering from IIT Bombay and completed his graduate studies at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Prior to founding Yellowdig, Shaunak spent a decade advising global companies on technology, strategy, and growth. Shaunak, welcome to the show.
Lauren, great to be here.
Oh, well, I can't wait to dive in with you today. We have this shared passion, you and I, a love for learning, and I know our listeners love to learn as well. And that's the mission of Yellowdig, from what I understand. We always like to jump in with our guests. As you can see, for people watching on YouTube, I've got a lot of books behind me. We've got the Brain Health Book Club, where we love to ask about reading. So, Shaunak, what's something you're reading these days? A book, an article? What can you recommend for our listeners?
So the book that I'm reading now is a book by John Doerr. He's a famous venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. He wrote a book called Measure What Matters. And as I'm trying to scale my business, I thought that that book would be quite interesting. Quite a few people recommended me that book. And I truly recommend anybody trying to build a business. I think it's a go-to book.
Oh, thank you for that. That is a great one. We will definitely include that in the show notes for folks to get their hands on that. Now, you've advised a lot of different industries. You've been in a lot of different spaces. I'm curious, what pulled you to want to be in the teaching and learning space specifically?
So the company that I currently run is called Yellowdig. So we provide a software solution to colleges and universities. As you said, we work with over 130 universities. So my journey into teaching was almost accidental. So if I kind of wind back in my earlier life, I spent about almost a decade with management consulting companies, advising corporations in various industries. And about 7 years back, I kind of went through this kind of soul-searching exercise where I wanted to start a company. A lot of people kind of think about, they've been in a workspace for a bunch of years and they want to say, okay, I want to start a company. And I really wanted to start something that I'm truly can connect with. So teaching and learning was something I was always excited in, and I love technology. So I wanted to build something in the kind of conjunction in these two spaces. And it has been a journey since I founded the company 7 years back.
I can only imagine. I mean, to bring those two worlds together, I think is great and so needed. And what good timing, as we had the pandemic that we all went through and learning did become basically entirely digital. What's been the most rewarding aspect to you about not only founding Yellowdig, but now 7 years later, seeing it through to this point as the CEO?
Well, the rewarding part is that, as you know, many startups fail. I think majority of startups fail. So when I quit my job 7 years back, it was a very difficult decision that time, looking backwards. And I wasn't sure if this company is going to survive 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. And now, it's been 7 years now. We are stalling it. We are, running it and humming. You have a great team in place. It's no longer only myself. When I started, it was just me. But there is a team behind it now. So, seeing this grow over the last 7 years and going through the learning process myself of starting and building a company has been very rewarding.
Oh, I can only imagine. And, we have a lot of listeners here who kind of sometimes dance in both worlds, the entrepreneurial space, the corporate space. Sometimes they're really considering, do I make that jump from one to the other? That takes a big leap of courage to make that step to start your own company. I mean, I'm sure a lot of listeners are wondering, Shaunak, what has been the secret of your success? How Yellowdig has been able to survive and thrive?
Well, I would say, the big secret probably is not to give up. As an entrepreneur, and it's not only just being an entrepreneur, if you are in a demanding work or job, you probably will be able to relate to this, which is every day, there are moments where things do not go the way I would expect, or, I probably have planned for something for a long time and it just goes a very different direction. and not being able to give up in those moments and kind of, strive through those difficult times have been important to come to this point.
Mhm.
The other thing I would say is learning. Personally, of course, we are in the learning space, but being an entrepreneur, I would say, has been a huge learning journey.
Mhm.
Um, and I luckily had the right advisors, people, teammates around me to take me through that journey over the last 7 years.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point about that piece about mentorship, having people guide you along. And I'm curious your thoughts too on, really assessing, is there a market for what you're offering, because I meet a lot of entrepreneurs. The passion is so there and they're so excited about their idea, but they don't always go through that process of beta testing something and making sure there's actually a market for it. What are your thoughts on that as you were starting Yellowdig?
Well, as you said, people start, and including myself, when I started my company, it was primarily passion and a problem I was very excited about, which is to make learning more enjoyable, fun, more engaging. But the question always comes down to if there is actual a business behind it, and are there people willing to pay you money for that so that you have enough revenue and support oneself and also a growing team. My thought is that, it probably is a combination of both, which is, it's important to kind of work on a problem that, the founder or the person who's starting the company is passionate about. Because I do believe every company goes through those times where things are quite difficult. And I think the passion takes the entrepreneur through those difficult times.
Mm.
So without that passion or without that purpose, it is very hard to build a company. So I think that's what, and money cannot be that purpose unless somebody really loves money. I mean, that outside of that, it's going to be very, very hard to kind of sustain, to build a company, which takes for longer than what most people would imagine takes to build a company.
Mhm.
The other thing I'll also kind of mention is that, but at the same time, it is important to build a group of people around you so that one can evaluate whether that problem actually has a business opportunity behind it. And very often that not what I see is that the problem that one starts with, I mean, there needs to be pivots around it to kind of get to the right opportunity.
Mhm.
Even though, the space remains the same, but the exact business or the business model can evolve, through the initial years to get to that market, where there are actual customers which are going to pay for those products and services.
I think that's such a great point. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this as well. We're seeing a lot of changes happening in the tech space right now. I mean, it was boomtown there for a while. And, you turn on the news lately and you hear about all these Twitter layoffs. Meta has a huge round of layoffs that are happening. There's clearly a shift. And I'm wondering what you think about that for people who may be listening today who are interested maybe in entering the tech space, or maybe they have a tech job right now and they're wondering, is my position in danger? What do you think about that as somebody who's completely immersed in the tech space?
I think being in a technology driven career, it could be technology or it could be any other career which is around tech, because there's so many new kind of jobs that are opening up, is very strong long term. Because if you see what's happening in every industry right now, including education, where we are, education is being disrupted by technology, right? So if you go like 5, 10 years back, most of learning used to happen, in person, physical, that's how learning used to be delivered. But now we are going through a rapid transformation, especially with the pandemic, towards online and digital learning.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look forward 10 years from now, I think a good portion of learning is going to be, delivered over digital channels or digital media and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the same trend is playing out in pretty much every other industry. So the digitization of industries is a long-term opportunity. But like anything else, there are challenges, right? The layoffs that are happening in tech, I think what may have happened is, there was overhiring that probably happened in some cases. In some cases, people kind of just put bets on things that should not have been put bets on.
Uh,
And that kind of environment leads to like overhiring and then adjustments along the way. So some companies are going through the process of kind of being more rational about their approach, especially in the environment we are in right now. So
mhm.
short term there is some pain, but I would definitely recommend, if somebody thinking about tech, like have a long-term view, because there might be some pains in the short term. Finding a job could be slightly more difficult. Getting the right salary might be slightly more difficult in the next 12 months.
Hmm.
But things are going to turn around because long-term prospect of tech is just amazing.
That's
Um,
great advice. That's great advice. We will definitely pull that clip, especially for people who are maybe a little nervous as they're looking at their current situation. And I think it brings up such a great point that the growth is never linear. It's it's there's some waves in there for sure. I want to talk about Yellowdig and learning, because one thing that you said that really spikes my interest is how you said you're making learning more engaging, more entertaining, more fun. And I'm sure we have some devil's advocates out here listening who are saying, I went through Zoom education and I did not enjoy it so much. So, how is Yellowdig making it more exciting and engaging to learn in an online format?
so anybody who has gone through learning experience over the pandemic, like, Zoom or Zoom University, we kind of always kind of refer to it, is not, I mean, truly online or digital education. What happened during that time was, most colleges, universities, they were underprepared. So, essentially overnight, most of these schools or colleges went online through Zoom classes. So we invite like hundreds of students in one class, and imagine a teacher talking to hundreds of students on a Zoom meeting. Like, sitting in a classroom in that environment would be boring, but sitting in a Zoom room like that, I most likely are going to switch it off and just go to sleep, right? So that was a reality, and news media actually picked it up, and rightly so, and talked about all the negatives of being an online environment or that kind of an experience, which is not ideal. I think the exciting part, which is where we are playing in, is that if you think about technology, the power of technology is more than, let's say, what we're used to. Like, for example, Zoom or Microsoft Teams or other ways of delivering knowledge, where the basic structure hasn't changed, right? Where you still have a teacher or instructor teaching to hundreds of students in a live classroom, right?
Yeah.
But we can reimagine that. I think the power is that you can completely reimagine that by bringing in aspects like game-based learning, where if you are a student, I mean, how fun it is to play games, right? I mean, Xbox or those kind of games are so much fun, and people want to play all day long. There are ways of actually using game design in the learning process, so we can reimagine how students are learning, where they're actually, almost like playing games with one another, but in the process, they're not just trying to get the ball through the goalpost, but actually learning how to do math or learning how to kind of discuss with one another. Roblox or Minecraft, these are incredibly popular. Like, any kids,
So
they
much.
love it. They won't stop playing, but imagine a kid being in a classroom, they don't want to get into the classroom, right? So game has a huge potential, in transforming learning. So that's one area we focus on as a company. The other area we focus on is what we call is that human connections, which is very often we learn by reading a book, or we learn by whatever is being given to us and we read it, but learning is fundamentally human to human, where people can discuss a topic, like social media, like Facebook or Twitter, where people can actually technically learn from. We can always debate that whether that happens in Twitter or not, but you can technically learn from one another. So we are bringing all those modern tech platforms into the learning environment, and making it available to colleges and universities.
That's fascinating to me. It sounds like you're really trying to meet people where they're at with their interests, rather than trying to make everybody fit into a mold of like, here's what's been kind of the classic learning structure: teacher, pupil, sit for an hour and listen. And especially as we're seeing people's attention spans change so much, that gaming component is really, I think, there's some potential there that makes a lot of sense to me. And with the human connection, I think that's fascinating too. I mean, I wonder how you navigate that, given that we see that in a way now, right? Where everybody can kind of be a journalist in a way now, with fact checking and things like that, that becomes its own dimension, right? And differences of opinion. Not that we have to get too far into the weeds, but I imagine people are kind of wondering that in their mind, how you do kind of navigate that when you're speaking about that human connection piece.
Yeah, so on that thing is that if you see the, as you said, right, the modern, world that we are living in is social media, for example, has a huge influence.
Mhm.
We have students who are, kids of all ages, or, adults also in social media, where they're learning about politics, health, anything that we think about, right? Twitter, for example, or TikTok is a huge, big platform for kids and also now adults as well. So it's not that, we have to kind of really think about how human connections can apply to learning, but I think the question in our mind is that what's already happening in the modern world, how can we rethink that from the learning standpoint so that we have the right kind of conversation that happens, right? So if you go to Facebook and let's say I want to talk about something, very often it might happen that Facebook's algorithm is dictating what I'm seeing there, right? So if
Yes.
I'm a Republican or a Democrat or whatever my affiliation is, and I'm seeing that content because echo chamber effect is a real thing,
Mhm.
that's kind of shaping public opinion in real time, and that's the world we are living in. So the way we are thinking about it is that rather than kind of really having an algorithm shape the public opinion, can we give those tools to educators so that they can effectively engage their audience, which is a student body, and have much more healthy debates with one another, right? So you can take the same example, let's say politics, like we just went to the midterm elections. You can actually, if you're learning about politics,
Mhm.
have a debate with your classmates,
Mhm.
not in social media, not driven by algorithms, but actually in a much more inclusive, much more safe environment
Mhm.
where you can voice your opinions and have a much more respectful debate with one another and see different points of views. um,
I
so
think
I mean
that's
that's what we're trying to bring into education.
I love that. I'm glad I asked that question because, it really, to me, speaks to more of an opportunity to help these students develop critical thinking skills, empathy. We're seeing people sometimes really struggle to hold dialogue with people who have difference of opinion, or I see that with a lot of my clients where they just kind of shut down, right? Because they're so afraid of saying the wrong thing or asking the wrong question. So to be creating these safer, braver spaces where people can engage in these dialogues, that's wonderful. And I think that's really what we need right now. With this concept of learning in general, I don't know if you see this, but I kind of see learning burnout in a way, especially I work with a lot of, college graduates who are just finishing going through, 15 plus years of education, and they're burned out, or they go through the motions of school, right? But they're not actually taking in what they're learning. How can we help people come back to or start a love of learning so that it's not just this external carrot or a box to check?
Yeah, that is, I think, such an important question, which is if you look at the statistics, about 1/3 of the students who are starting college are not finishing their degrees even after 6 years.
Wow.
Not only people are burning out, they're dropping out, they're not finishing their degrees, but the amount of student debt, and colleges are no longer that cheap. So the amount of debt you are keeping and then not even getting a degree or a certificate out of it is a huge problem right now. I think the problem can be solved, but we need different stakeholders to come together to solve the problem, which is, fundamentally, if students are getting burned out, that means that they are not really seeing the value that
Mm.
education is supposed to give them. But if you talk to an instructor or a professor, they have dedicated their lives to actually teach students. So something is going off where students are coming, but they're not really getting what they want, and the educators are there, and they're also getting burned out. By the way, there is a number I recently saw is that overwhelming number of teachers in colleges and schools are actually on the verge of also quitting their jobs because they are feeling burned out as well at the same time.
Mm.
I think in my mind, the problem is a lot more systemic right now, where the way we have defined what is to get a college degree or get to schools have been so defined in a way which is not for the modern era. Um, you know,
You know,
it's
I,
it's an old system which worked for a long time. Of course, there were a lot of benefits that came out of that system. But I think for the modern, generation, these students who are coming to these, colleges or schools, of all ages, they cannot relate to what they're studying in the classroom to what their real lives are, right? right? I mean, I'm spending 2 years to get a degree, but at the same time, what I'm learning may not be that relatable to the job that I'm going to apply to. So making learning a lot more relevant for the modern world is probably where things are at, and that change is a big. I mean, we are a small piece of that puzzle, as a education company, but there are many other things that needs to happen.
Yeah. Oh, I feel like we could talk about this a long time. I probably maybe have an unpopular opinion on this, but every time I actually voice this opinion, I find that people are often like, I kind of feel that way too, that I don't know. I don't necessarily think college is for everyone in the sense that, or at least the traditional model of college, kids are so socialized now of like, this is the next step. You're going to go to a college. And you get to that college and what are you actually learning? I can say from my own college experience, I did not get very many hands-on skills to actually do my job. And I hear from a lot of my peers that that's been their experience too. And, at what point are we going to really start questioning that of like, something's got to change, So the fact that one thing I'm pulling away from our conversation with Yellowdig, it sounds like you're really trying to meet folks with where they're at, what their needs are, instead of trying to have people fit into these boxes of like, here's been the standardized norm. And who knows, I imagine this will take a long, long time if it ever comes to fruition. But I imagine we're probably going to see more and more people at an unrest and frustration with feeling like they're maybe getting an education that's not actually serving their ultimate career.
Yeah, and your point around whether college is relevant for everybody, and I do agree it's not for everybody, because if somebody wants to build a skill in one area, let's say digital marketing, because they want to take a job in social media manager somewhere, they don't have to go through a 2-year program. There are certificates that should be available to them. Yeah. And some things are happening, by the way. There are companies that are coming up. These could be public companies or private companies, which are offering different ways of learning, such as smaller micro masters programs, which are much shorter, certificate programs that you can just take, like Coursera or edX. Those kind of providers are offering much lower cost, much more targeted, skill-oriented learning. Things are starting to change in that direction. So I think the other thing I would say is that, this whole change or disruption in higher education has been happening for quite some time. There have been a lot of frustration over the last 10, 15 years to kind of some real change to happen. But I think this pandemic is really putting some real pressure where, students are starting to ask very clearly to their institutions that whatever they're going to invest time and money in, is they're going to get the value, and the enrollment numbers are actually speaking up. They're actually voting with the enrollment numbers. So some colleges are gaining enrollment, others are not. And I think it's very important now colleges to kind of wake up and really see that, okay, if they really want to be in business 5 to 10 years down the line, they really have to start to think about student-oriented learning. And things are happening. I mean, given we work with so many institutions, we do see, many institutions which are acting rapidly. Unfortunately, not everybody, but many of them are. And I think it's an interesting space right now. We'll see what happens in the next 5, 10 years.
You're giving me hope. That's awesome. That's really cool to hear. And I agree, I do see it more at some institutions than others. I think about, even my undergrad, I did some work in journalism, and I remember being in my internship at NBC News. Now, I'm a diehard UCLA Bruin. That is where I went to undergrad. I will be proud forever to be a Bruin. But I gotta say, those USC Trojan kids, they knew how to produce, edit, film, and I got in there. I'm like, I can tell you the theories of communication, So, the fact that I do see that at some schools more than others, where they really are teaching their students the hands-on skills to do the job. I see that evolving that way. And it's great to hear from you that, these institutions are making some shifts to meet students where they're at and what their needs are. Now, switching gears here a little bit, this is a podcast about mental health, and we love to talk about psychology on this show. I really do believe learning, when we come at it from the right angle, supports our mental health. Unfortunately, I think for a lot of us, it's been a negative effect with the mental health, right? The stress around finals and midterms and the academic pressures. How do you see an opportunity for learning to actually support our mental health rather than hurt it?
I think it goes back to making learning a lot more interesting and joyful. Because anything that is fundamentally not joyful, and learning should be a joyful process, is going to have a negative impact on mental health. If you take about like any difficult subjects like math or sciences, right? So there is always a time where the students might struggle a little bit because they are learning a new concept. There might be things that they have to learn first before they actually find the joy in learning. But this goes back to the educators to design courses in a way so that the difficulty is kind of designed in a way so that they actually finally see some joy out of it, right? I often say that for these kind of courses, it's always very important to show the applications. If I'm learning something very difficult, the first question is, if I learn this, how is it going to help me? Maybe there's something very unique I can learn, or this is being applied in this way that gives the motivation. So thinking about motivation, thinking about those things to really make sure that it's a very joyful experience, because too often, as you have said this, I've said this, which is it's like almost like check the box, right?
Yes.
Get to the point and the whole joy is out of it. The other thing I'll point out is it's also important to have a community. Because learning just sitting behind a laptop or being in the backbencher is never that enjoyable. So again, building a community where students feel they're part of a community and they can learn from one another is important, because without that, I think human beings are not designed to be just sole operators. I mean, we are social animals, so I think learning should be like that.
Oh, I agree with you. And I love that you speak about that, coming back to the joy of learning and the application piece. I see that so missing. You hear students say all the time, why do I need to know this? Why does this matter? And giving people the buy-in of like, here's how this is going to impact your life and what you can do with it. That's what we need. Now, Shaunak, we always ask our guests, what they do for their own mental health. You're a successful entrepreneur, CEO, founder of Yellowdig. Clearly, you've had some incredible accomplishments. What do you do on a regular basis to support your own mental health?
I think from being a CEO of a company, I mean, of course, challenges are very normal, like, being any demanding role, as you can imagine. I think for me is to make sure that what I'm working on has a higher purpose, which I think is important, because very often I'll get into a difficult situation, which is stressful for myself, but I always try to take a step back and think about why I'm even doing this, because I did sign up for this role, and the higher purpose is something that I want to build over 5-10 years, as opposed to 1 or 2 or 3 days or a couple of weeks. That definitely helps me. The other thing which I'm getting better at, which wasn't always the case, which is to kind of take very forced time off. Often starting a company is 24/7 responsibility. Sometimes there's no way around it. I mean, how much ever I'll preach for it in the beginning stages, one may work very hard, but that is not sustainable for too long. So I think it's important to kind of get to the right stage so that either have people around who can help and take more load off, or take some forced time off. One rule I've set for myself is that for myself and my team, unless there's an emergency, we do not work weekends and we do not work after 6 p.m. So if something really bad happens, of course, we are available, but outside of that, we will try to tackle it the next day. So we're trying to put some, very simple policies in place so that we can sustain it for a long time.
Yeah, that sustainability, so that you and the team don't burn out. And it sounds like you've got some really good boundaries in place. And when it starts with you, the top down, that really has an effect for everybody. Okay, my last biggie question for you. We ask all our guests this question. No pressure with this one. Shaunak, what do you hope your legacy will be?
Legacy. Okay, so my legacy is hopefully, whatever investment I'm making in education, my hope is that we make a small dent in this space. This is how I started the company 7 years back. It was just a dream at that point. Fast forward now, we do have an impact with a group of institutions. So my hope is that, at least for some time, I will carry the torch, and at some point, somebody else will carry it forward. So that's the hope.
Mm. Well, I would argue you are making a big dent, not a little dent. And what an enlightening conversation today. I learned so much about the state of education. I feel hopeful hearing how you're sharing changes are being made, that you're seeing it right there on the forefront. I'm excited to see what's happening with the future of learning, how your company is being so innovative with this, and considering what a learning deficit we're seeing for our students, we need that more than ever. And I hope this inspires our listeners to get learning a little bit more for the love of it, whether it's through a game or a book you enjoy, just coming back to a little bit of learning every day. Shaunak, where can people get in touch with you if they want to hear more about your story or learn more about what Yellowdig is doing?
So our website, which is yellowdig.co, is a good place to go if you want to learn more about Yellowdig. And you can also get in touch with us if you want to learn more. And if you want to connect with me, LinkedIn is probably the best way. So you can look up my name, Shaunak Roy, in LinkedIn, and happy to connect with you.
Wonderful. Well, Shaunak, what a gift to have you on the show today. You are a game changer in the education and the tech space. So thank you for joining us today. Be well.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Thanks for having me.